one champion, and that comes in the form of UCLA knocking the snot out of South Carolina yesterday, 79-51. UCLA wins their first ever women's NCAA championship. Absolute domination by the Bruins, my friend.
And I am so happy for UCLA, for all of those seniors, 6 seniors who are going to be leaving this year. They got to the Final Four last year. They were the second best team in the country pretty much for the entirety of the season. It felt like, if not now, then when for UCLA? If not now, then when for Corey Close? And so Lauren Betts wins a national championship with her little sister, Sienna Betts. That this group of seniors that has played so much basketball together finally gets their national championship. So for Corey Close, for this program, for all of these players, I am so happy for them. And I want to give UCLA so much credit because they did to both Texas and South Carolina something that I didn't really think was entirely possible, and that's pretty much totally and completely shut them down. I mean, UCLA gave up combined less than 100 total points between Texas and South Carolina. We're talking about two of the best teams in the country. Two of the best teams in the country who average combined about 180 points between both South Carolina and Texas combined per game. We were talking about pure and utter domination from UCLA. I mean, UCLA took several of South Carolina's leading scorers out of the game. You look at Joyce Edwards, she scored 20 plus points in 3 out of South Carolina's games in the tournament. Joyce Edwards and Tanaya Latson, a leading scorer in the NCAA last season, they were basically totally and completely non-impact players in the national championship game. And UCLA has done this. They've blown opponents out. Going back to the Big Ten championship game, Iowa was a Sweet 16 team, and UCLA beat them by 50 points in the conference championship game. So UCLA's championship is no fluke. UCLA's championship didn't come off of a weird call or a last-second shot. No. UCLA's championship came in the form of pure and utter domination every single step along the way. They only lost one game all season long, and it was around Thanksgiving. So there's so much credit to this UCLA team. Everything that I'm about to say takes nothing away from UCLA, Fitz. I think South Carolina was experiencing a UConn hangover. I think South Carolina was so physically and emotionally drained from that UConn game that they gave the Huskies everything that they had. That slaying the dragon, that taking down big bad UConn was kind of like South Carolina's national championship, and they just didn't have anything else to give. And then you add on top of the fact that it was incredibly emotional with Dawn and Geno's exchanging of words after the game, and after all of the subsequent social media rhetoric. Like, I just think that South Carolina's tank was too close to empty to hold off a team, an elite team like UCLA.
I totally agree with you. And I think what really hit me about South Carolina is the very thing we talked about over the weekend. You know, as we were getting ready for these games on Friday, one thing we talked about was that South Carolina has had the score of last year's national championship game up in the facility every day. And we talked about the fact that going into that game against UConn, you were going to see a team that frankly had all of this emotion pent up because they have had to face that demon every single day for the last year. And they came out in that Final Four and they faced it. They absolutely faced that demon. They conquered that demon. It took every ounce of energy they had. And we'll get to the controversy afterwards in a moment, but certainly it's not lost on me that South Carolina used a lot of their turbo button, to use the video game term we all know, just to get through UConn. They out-efforted UConn. They out-hustled UConn. They out-energied UConn. They out-UConn. And they deserve all the credit. The women on the court deserve all the credit for that win. But then you have to turn right back around and find that same level of emotion. When you spent all that time ready to slay the dragon, it's just one of those things. You have to finish the job. I mean, we often joke about the fact that people forget the Miracle on Ice was not the gold medal game. And we wouldn't remember the Miracle on Ice as much if it didn't result in a gold medal championship after that, right? Like, there are things that have to be done to finish the job afterwards. And South Carolina just didn't have it left in the tank. And, you know, Dawn's certainly handling it. We got smacked today. Got to figure out how. They're the first team, men's, to lose an NCAA title game by 20 or more points in back-to-back season. That is such a daunting part of the conversation of who South Carolina is, because they got their butts flat out whooped by a UCLA team that I think smelled blood. Like UCLA, the minute that game started, just felt like they were ready to take it to South Carolina, force them to meet you where you are. And South Carolina wasn't ready for it. So I'm with you. We want to be really focused here to give all the credit in the world to UCLA, because to be clear, South Carolina didn't lose the championship. UCLA went out and won one. So those women deserve a ton of credit for doing that. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to say South Carolina just wasn't ready to rebound from all of the emotion from the game before. And that emotion, to your point, comes back to some of what we saw at the end of the game. I think this Final Four and this championship will not be remembered as much as Geno v. Dawn will be. We all saw the moment at the end of the game where UConn head coach Geno Auriemma goes up to Dawn Staley and loses his mind because, according to him, he didn't like the way things were handled pregame. And I need to even stress that at the press conference afterwards, Caroline, he was asked about it, and he stressed that he wasn't given the proper handshake. He waited several minutes. Reporters pushed back and even let Geno know that there was video and photo evidence of he and Dawn Staley meeting before the game. And he said the reporters were missing the point. This all resulted in an apology afterwards, but we've had enough time to let it simmer a little bit. Now that you've had some time, what's your reaction to what we saw post-game and what should have been a moment for Dawn and South Carolina?
I don't want to even hear about the apology because Gino had an opportunity in his post-game press conference to address it. I understand in the moment you just lost and you're pissed off and you're embarrassed. I'm not going to say that Gino should be super, super pumped about losing that game, especially in the manner with which he did. But Geno Auriemma, any coach in any sport, but especially a coach like Geno, a coach that has won 12 national championships, a coach that has been to 25 Final Fours, a coach that has been at the mountaintop of the sport for the last 4 decades, is supposed to hold himself to a certain level of decorum. And when he had the opportunity to apologize right after it happened, if he really had any shred of remorse for what he did or what he said, he would have acknowledged it in the post-game press conference, but instead he said, no, I don't take back what I said. He said, Dawn Staley and I don't have much in common. He doubled down on it in the post-game press conference. I think this is such a horrific look for Geno Auriemma, somebody who I have a lot of respect for. One moment, one decision, and one interaction is enough for me to start changing my mind about how I feel about Geno Auriemma. It doesn't take the trophies away, and it doesn't take away the dominance of UConn, but it does change, at least in my mind, the way that I view Geno, because he acted like a baby. He did not lose with any even shred of class. I thought it was an embarrassing look for Geno Auriemma. And Fitz, do you think the pregame handshake, which they did do, we're looking at it right now, they shook hands before the game, but let's just say if UConn, if the roles were reversed, if UConn game and they punched their ticket to the national championship game, do you think Geno makes a big old stink about the pregame handshake? Of course not. That is a crybaby loser mentality.
How would we be treating, I love to play the shoes on the other foot game. How would we be treating Dawn Staley if she had acted that way towards Geno Auriemma after the national championship? How would we be acting towards her? And we had the apology up on the screen earlier. I cannot stress this enough. The apology never says Dawn Staley's name. It never addresses Dawn Staley. In fact, it addresses the staff, and it never says Dawn's name. To me, the longer an apology is, the less I buy it. All Geno had to say in an apology was, I screwed that up. I've talked to coach. I'll make it right. That's it. That's all you had to do. But instead, we get a long statement from Geno that doesn't really say anything. And that's not okay, because your actions said so much afterwards. In that moment, if you're going to issue an apology, which comes at the heels of multiple people sit down, right? Like, let's be very clear here. There is no coach in the country that sits down, pens that apology, and just puts it out. Everybody's involved in the process of issuing an apology, right? So when you think about the number of people that had to look at that, sign off on that, and then decide that was okay, and that's the moment that we're supposed to look at and say, oh yeah, no, I get it. And you're 1,000% right, Caroline. Nothing takes away the fact that Geno Auriemma is one of the most accomplished coaches in any sport in the world. Nothing changes the fact that he has an absolute hallway full of trophies. Nothing changes the fact that he's a winner. But it's allowed for us to change the way we view him right now. That is allowed based solely on his actions. And it's not just his actions at the end of the game. It's not just his actions at the podium. And it's not just his apology. It's all of those things tripled down at once. It's so simple to come out and say, man, I screwed up. I'm sorry. And I'm going to talk to coach one-on-one to make it right. That's okay. Right? We don't need to know every ounce of how he's making it right. But when you issue an apology that never actually apologizes to the person that you truly wronged in this process, which isn't just the players, it's also the coach, shame on you. I cannot say this loud enough. Shame on you, Geno Auriemma, because your platform, it demands that you do better in these moments. Your status in the game demands that you treat these moments better. And you didn't do it. And everything since you've done, since your actions were seen by the world, has just doubled and tripled down on why you didn't and aren't handling it the right way.
And also, we heard Gino at half talk about, call out the refs and say, "Well, one of my kids' jerseys is ripped. Where's the foul for that?" And then the broadcast instantly pans to the video of Sarah Strong ripping her jersey herself. Geno Auriemma causes this big old stink with Don Staley about not shaking his hand pregame when we have seen photos and videos of Geno shaking Don's hand pregame. So I'm so confused where all of these things are coming from. Like the Geno, somebody who has spent 41 years building his legacy, has now tainted his legacy and reputation in one evening over what? A handshake? Over something so arbitrary and something so minuscule within the grand scheme of the game? I understand that that's tradition. You shake hands, that's sportsmanship. I get it. I hear you. But for Geno to put himself in the line of fire, for Geno to damage his relationship with Don Staley, because Geno and Don go back a far way. They don't just coach against each other. They've coached with each other on Team USA. Like, they know each other very well. So that's a reputation that I would probably venture to say is irreparable. And for what? You have now put a stain on the UConn program. And for what? Like, what are you getting out of this? It's all just so befuddling and confusing to me. And I think the worst part about all of this, bad that Geno Auriemma has brought to the surface, the worst part is we're talking about him. We are not talking about how South Carolina held UConn to less than 30% from the field. A team that shoots better than 50% on average throughout the entirety of the season, one of the best shooting teams in the country. We're not talking about how Agat McKeer, a freshman getting her first taste of the Final Four, went out and got double digits off the bench. We're not talking about how South Carolina commanded the game from the very beginning, and they totally and completely dominated UConn for the entirety of the second half and really a majority of that game. We're not talking about any of that. That should be the conversation. We should be talking about those players and Don Staley's game plan. But no, instead, we're talking about Geno Auriemma's little temper tantrum. And that's the real, travesty of it all.
We're also not talking about a UConn team that was undefeated throughout the entire regular season, only to have it end that way. A season that will now be noted for its failures, not for its success, and a season that will be remembered on the UConn side for a meltdown from a coach that means so much to college sports.